Just under 28 years ago, in September of 1997, a little game called Lego Island released. Lego Island is a first-person, open-world action-adventure game developed and published by Mindscape. Now, before we focus on the gameplay of Lego Island itself, we first have to understand how Lego Island came to be. So let's cast our minds back to 1983, a whole 17 years before I was born. There was a little incident in the gaming industry called the video game crash. Or if you're from Japan, you'll probably know this as the Atari shock. To cut a long story short, there was massive oversaturation in the market, mostly attributed to Atari pumping out loads of rubbish games. Yeah, let's not talk about E.T. Anyway, a few years pass and Nintendo enters into the market with the Nintendo Entertainment System. And notice how they called it Entertainment System and not Video Game Console. So anyway, yeah, Nintendo pretty much saves the day, video games start to become cool again. By the end of the 80s you have the Game Boy, and in the early 90s we got the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. So by the time that LEGO were considering getting into the video game market, there were some pretty heavy hitters, and you had the original PlayStation as well. Essentially what I'm trying to say is the way kids were playing with toys, using the internet, which was still a relatively new thing, and playing with video games was changing. And because of this, the LEGO Group were worrying about the impact that video games and Nintendo themselves were having on the toy business. So we are now in the year 1995, in February to be precise, at the annual Toy Fair in New York City, where Wes Jenkins and Paul Melmed of developer Mindscape had travelled to pitch the idea of Lego Island to the LEGO Group. So really, this pitch came amidst a perfect storm of worry and video game growth. Anyway, so yeah, the LEGO Group announced a deal with Mindscape to make a series of video games, the first one being based on the LEGO Town theme. Now, before we go any further, if you are a fan of LEGO video games or licensed video games, then this channel will be perfect for you, so why not hit that subscribe button and tap the bell for notifications of my future uploads. So let's insert the CD into our computer and continue on with the video.
Oops, you have to put the CD in your computer.
So development for Lego Island began in very late 1995, with hirings for the team going on between late 95 and early 1996. The Lego company officially announced the partnership with Mindscape in early 1996 as well. At E3 of 1996, which was held in May of that year, Lego Island was officially unveiled. It currently had the working title of Adventures on Lego Island. Now, just as a side note, E3 1996 was a pretty special one because this was the event where the Nintendo 64 as well as Mario 64 was officially unveiled to the public. So it's pretty cool, of course overshadowed by the huge unveiling of Lego Island. Anyway, take a look at this Lego Island intro video shown off at E3 of that year. Now, I just want to say a huge thank you to the people in my Discord server for pointing me in the right direction of where to get my sources for this video. If you want to join that server and discuss some cool games and, well, point me in the right direction, then the link is in the description below. So with thanks to the hard work of the team at Bricksters, we have a very good understanding and documentation of what the development process was like for Lego Island. Here we can see Lego Island being physically built by the team at various steps along the way of the development process, which I just think is an insanely cool thing to do. Obviously these days with huge open worlds it'd be quite hard to build a real scale model of your game, but to be able to do this for a game like Lego Island is just absolutely fantastic. The team also did focus testing with groups of kids to make sure they were heading in the right direction. These focus tests have been pretty well documented over the years, with them even being mentioned in a memoir called The Making of Lego Island. Now, unfortunately, this memoir is incomplete as it was being written by Wes Jenkins himself, who sadly passed away in 2017. However, if you want to read this or any of the other sites I've mentioned so far, all my sources will be in the description below. So basically what I'm trying to portray from this is that the team that were working on Lego Island truly cared about and loved Lego Island. This was about to be a whole new era of blending a physical toy with a video game, and would go on to start a legacy of many more Lego games. Now, bearing that in mind, before we move away from the development process of Lego Island, there's just one other thing I'd like to talk about. The game would eventually launch in September of 1997, and not long after this, the Lego Group would rescind its license with Mindscape, not allowing them to make any further Lego games. Now, coincidentally, there are reports that Mindscape actually fired everyone on the team the day before launch so they could avoid paying bonuses tied to the game's sales, which would have been quite a lot because the game sold very well. Now, there is no evidence to tie the firing of the Mindscape employees and the Lego Group taking away the license together, but if we put two and two together, it does make sense. So next up we have to talk about someone else on the development team that was very, very key to the game's success. And that someone is Lauren Nelson, the game's composer or musical director. Now, throughout this video you have been hearing songs from the game, and there are so many bangers on the soundtrack. The racing themes, the chasing themes, the Lego Island main theme, there's just so much nostalgia but genuinely good music here as well. However, one thing you will notice in the game is that the music isn't of particular high quality. And that is because at the time, obviously the file sizes they could have in the mid to late 90s to fit into these games were not very big, which means that these soundtracks had to be scaled down and condensed, so they obviously weren't going to sound as good. Now, unfortunately, for the longest time, it was thought that the higher definition version of these songs were lost forever, because the master tapes were unfortunately lost in a houseboat accident. Yeah, that's right, a houseboat accident. You can't make it up when it comes to this game. However, with help from Lauren Nelson himself, an archive of cassette tapes were found featuring a lot of the game's music in a much higher quality than they ever were found before. So in the late 2010s, these were uploaded online and now they're there for everyone to enjoy. Just hear the difference for the Bricksters theme.
He wakes up and breaks up the scene. Some Legos, they think that he's keen. But Pepper, he knows if the bricks catches you, your bricks are toast. He wakes up and breaks up the scene. Some Legos, they think that he's keen. But Pepper, he knows if the bricks catches you, your bricks are toast.
Yeah, wow, that is much better. Also, on a side note, Lego Island having a punk rock song for its antagonist is just so 90s, I absolutely love it. Now, before we discuss any features and gameplay of Lego Island, there's one other thing I do have to talk about, and that is the dialogue in this game. Oh my god. Some of the dialogue in this game is just so funny, and I'm really glad that so much time was spent writing these stupid jokes. It's really in theme with what Lego has turned out to be with all the TT Lego games and their stupid humour. You obviously have the classics from the Infomaniac that have been memed into oblivion about inserting the CD into certain places where CD shouldn't be inserted, but there's some iconic lines from every single character. Some of my favourites come from the Brickster. Just listen to a couple of these.
These bricks. Pepper. Pepper! What kind of a name is Pepper anyway? What are you, from the condiment family? Where's your brother Salt, or your sister Ketchup, or your exotic Hungarian uncle Paprika? I'll bet he spices up the dinner conversation, don't he? Well, if it isn't Officer Laura and her 3 lovely hats. I hear you can't add too well. Go figure. Go figure. Get it?
So, Lego Island is played from a first-person perspective, and there are 5 possible playable characters. This includes 2 police officers, Laura and Nick Brick, the pizzeria owners, Mama and Papa Briccolini, and their adopted son, Pepperoni, who is the protagonist of the game. Each of these 5 playable characters, as well as 2 non-playable characters, the Infomaniac and the Brickster, are all supposedly modelled on different intelligence types that are listed in Howard Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences. Anyway, each of these characters have their own unique abilities and they can perform different actions to customise the NPCs and just the general look of the island. There are also a few different vehicles that you could construct to use in missions or for exploration, which is a car, a jet ski, a dune buggy, and a police helicopter. These vehicles can be used throughout 5 different missions that are in the game. There's a pizza delivery, a race at the racetrack, a jet ski race at the beach, a towing job for the gas station, and ambulance driving for the hospital. And these missions were pretty damn cool, but the best thing about this game, and pretty much what it was sold on, was the customization and building, because of course that's what LEGO is. Speaking of the customization, take a look at this advert from the late 90s that was showing off LEGO Island and its customization features.
Pickle brain, monkey breath. Mom can't say anything because I'm not touching Doofus.
What if you could change anything you wanted?
I love you, little bro.
You can in LEGO Island, the new CD-ROM game. It's an entire LEGO world where you chase a LEGO villain, build and race LEGO vehicles, and change everything from the landscape to people's attitudes.
You're the coolest brother.
Even the music. The new LEGO Island CD-ROM game. LEGO Island CD-ROM game comes with everything shown here.
Now, whilst the original LEGO Island wasn't super heavy in terms of story, if you had built the police helicopter and deliver a pizza to the jail as pepperoni, this then triggers a mission that is essentially a finale to the game with 2 potential endings. To cut a long story short, the Brickster orders a very spicy pizza and uses the fumes to melt the lock on his cell and escape in the helicopter, and it's up to you to stop him from disassembling the island. If you successfully do this, you get the good ending and all the people congratulating you for saving the island. However, if you fail to catch him before he disassembles all the buildings, you'll get the bad ending, which has all the citizens of the island in tears, crying, and the Brickster there gloating about his epic victory, although it cuts to the infomaniac that reassures you that you can rebuild the island. However, I mention this because there is actually a cut bad ending, which I think is just absolutely cursed, and just had to share it with you. It's just an early version of what would eventually be the ending we got, but I just think it's quite funny.
It's mine, all mine.
So yeah, that ending is a thing that exists. So later on in this video, after I've covered all 3 of the games, there will be a section on the legacy that LEGO Island and its sequels have left behind. But in the meantime, let's talk sales and critical response. So, bearing in mind that LEGO Island did not release until the September of 1997, it managed to scratch its way up to the 11th best-selling game of the year, with about 325,000 copies sold and approximately $12 million in revenue earned. The following year, it would jump even higher to number 7 on those charts and sell more than 400,000 copies. And not only this, it actually went on to win some awards, including the Family Game of the Year and Best Kid title, which was won at the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences in 1997. Now, at the point of its release, many video game reviewers did not give LEGO Island a review because it was viewed as an edutainment game, which is something that many critics would probably stay away from due to its target audience only being for kids. However, if we look to Metacritic for its user score, we can see that LEGO Island currently holds a generally favourable score with an 8.2 out of 10, with everyone calling it an absolute classic and a childhood legend. Now, before we focus on the next LEGO Island game, I just want to circle back around to what Mindscape was working on. When LEGO announced its partnership with Mindscape, there were plans for many more LEGO video games. Whilst there were several ideas that were scrapped once Mindscape and LEGO split, there was one much more prominent above the rest, and this was called Beneath the LEGO Fantasy, or it was also known as LEGO Sea Challenge. There is literally one small teaser which was an Easter egg in LEGO Island itself, and outside of this, there is no other evidence or footage or anything of this game, making it completely lost media. This game was intended to explore the importance of ecology and environmentalism from an educational perspective, which to be honest actually sounds really interesting, a whole Lego Island themed game set underwater, based around wildlife. Now, it is unknown how far along in development LEGO Sea Challenge was, or if it was just basically an idea that was on the drawing board, and sadly, we probably never will know.
And on that terrible disappointment,
Let's move on to LEGO Island 2, The Bricksters' Revenge. So we are now in the year 1999, and a little developer called Silicon Dream Studio was working on a project called LEGO Island 2. Now, at some point beforehand, another developer is mentioned in early documents of the game's development, and that is Chrysalis Software. These guys were the developers behind the LEGO Chess and Legoland PC games that released in 1998 and 2000 respectively. Now, as per Brickster Bytes, there are several documents with the Chrysalis name on showing early development, but I can't find any reason as to why this development was moved over to Silicon, unless there's something I'm missing. So the game ended up being called LEGO Island 2: The Bricksters' Revenge, and whilst the development process is not as well documented, nor is it as chaotic as the original LEGO Island, there are still some interesting tidbits that we've learnt from different interviews and documents that have since been found. But before we dive into that, let me just give you a brief overview of LEGO Island 2. So whilst the original LEGO Island was a PC exclusive, this game had ports made for the Game Boy Color, the Game Boy Advance, and the original PlayStation. The game was released in March of 2001, except on the Game Boy Advance where it launched in October of the same year. Now, this time around you can only play as Pepper, and the game is from a third-person perspective, with the exception of a few of the minigames throughout the game. So if you cast your minds back to the first LEGO Island, you will remember that he broke out of prison using a spicy pizza. So take a guess as to how the Brickster gets out this time. Mama and Papa Briccoloni have been taking precautions when they're sending pizzas to the Brickster. They are only putting very mild spice on to prevent him from breaking out the same way he did before. However, what they do not know is that after every pizza, the Brickster has been storing peppers from the pizzas so that he eats them all at once and melts the jail bars with his fiery, spicy breath.
Step back and watch my dragon breath blow. Uh-oh.
Oh man, I feel like the simple solution here is to just simply not deliver pizzas to people who are in jail. Anyway, the Brickster steals a police helicopter along with a book called the Constructopedia, which has all the instructions to the buildings on LEGO Island, and with each page that he tears out, a building on the island gets destroyed. And now, even though the island once again has emergency services, it's up to Pepper to save the day. On a side note, I find the release of this game a little bit strange. I understand this game being ported to Game Boy Color and Game Boy Advance because it's always just standard to have a handheld version of your major release, but putting this game on the original PlayStation when the PS2 had already launched in the previous year just doesn't really make that much sense to me. If they'd put it on PS2 and the original PlayStation during this transition period, then yeah, that would make sense, but just putting it on the original PlayStation just seems a bit bizarre. Now, I'm not going to focus any further on these three console versions today because that could be done in a separate video, so we're going to be focusing on the PC version.
Have you seen this man? He's on the run again in LEGO Island 2. As Pepper, it's up to you to stop the Brickster. Are you ready for adventure on PC? Windows 95, 98, or Millennium Edition required. PlayStation. Or Game Boy Color. LEGO Island 2, The Bricksters' Revenge. Rated E for everyone. Each game and system sold separately. Your world, your rules.
Oh man, that advert just doesn't do it for me. It's nowhere near as creative or as funny as the original LEGO Island Brother advert. It's just feels quite generic, to be honest. Other than the life-size Brickster at the start, that's quite funny. So anyway, an interview with Steve Hughes, who was the lead programmer for the PC and PlayStation versions of LEGO Island 2, as well as the PC and PlayStation 2 versions of Island Xtreme Stunts, has taught us quite a lot about the development process over at Silicon Dreams. Now, he doesn't actually remember the process that got the LEGO game to start to begin with, but he does remember getting off to a bit of a false start with LEGO. So they used a standard API for all the minigames within LEGO Island, and remember that because that'll be important in a minute. And they wrote a load of different minigames that were mostly around shooting. Now, obviously, LEGO were not a fan of having their toys shown to be shooting weapons, so that was shot down immediately. There were also some inclusions from the Rock Raider franchise, as well as a Jungle Run game that they've described as Indiana Jones meets Pilot Wings, so it would have been interesting to see what that was going to look like in the final product. So anyway, back to their APIs. So an API is an application programming interface. It's a connection between programs, essentially, a software interface. And these guys used one standard API to write all the minigames, and this meant they shared a lot of the same code between them, which on paper was a very good idea because it meant they could cut down the coding time and use a lot of the same things over again. However, a lot of the shared code that they used was very fundamental to each of the minigames, so if something got changed or they had to fix a bug, then they had to play through the whole game every time they did that. Steve recalls that his longest on-site shift when they were working with these APIs ironing out bugs was 44 hours, which is just absolutely insane. One other really interesting piece of information that came from this interview with Steve was that he admitted he still has a few LEGO relics from the development, and that he even had an original Pepper minifig prototype, which you can now see on screen. Oh man, I really want a prototype Pepper. So this time around, LEGO Island itself has had a massive redesign. It's a completely different layout from the original game, and is a bit bigger with a bit more going on. As well as this, there are a few other locations you get to visit throughout the game, but we'll get to that later. I'm going to be honest with you guys, there are some weird, baffling design choices in this game. For example, Pepper has a skateboard which you can use by pressing the control button, but it's actually slower than just moving around on foot. Later on in the game, you will also get to drive some cars around the island, and once again, it's pretty much about the same speed, if not slower, than going on foot. Pepper can also pretty much scale every part of the island except for about one single cliff ledge, which pretty much makes this guy a mountain goat. But yeah, it just seems weird to me to make a game around customization and getting to use different vehicles and making the fastest mode of transportation your own legs. So in terms of controls, you can move the camera around with the mouse, and you control Pepper by using the arrow keys. You can jump using the left Alt key, hitting enter customizes anything that can be customized nearby, and then you can use your skateboard with the control button. You can also throw pizzas by pressing the spacebar. Now, to be honest, these controls are absolutely fine. There's nothing wrong with them, they're just a product of their time. But I'll tell you what is not fine is how little direction the game gives you when you first start. I had absolutely no idea what I was doing when I booted the game up. In fact, to be honest with you, I only knew roughly what to do because I'd watched the Cad Icarus video that had LEGO Island in it, where he finally figured out that all the characters point in the direction you need to go, and I just went from there.
Newsflash! Pizza delivery boy forgets his own round.
Once you figure that out, however, you do get to see that this game does still have some of that original LEGO Island charm. The dialogue in this game, whilst not as funny as the original, still has its moments, with the Bricksters still having some fantastic jokes and some of the other characters getting their chance to shine as well. The graphics, I would say, are pretty good, and even by today's standards, they really don't look that bad. The character models are all pretty good, the building models are all pretty good, it's just the actual landscape itself that looks a little bit ugly. However, I do have to say there is one thing that really lets itself down compared to the original game, and that is the soundtrack. Oh my god, it's so boring. There are a few standout moments where you get later on into the game and visit different lands and have mini-games, but as you're just wandering the island, you just have the same song on loop. over and over again, and you're going to be doing a lot of walking around the island from one point to the next. The game has certainly lost a lot of the charm compared to the original because it just feels like no effort was put into the soundtrack whatsoever. It just feels very generic in comparison to the original. And also, the Brickster doesn't even get a punk rock theme song in this game. Like, what's the point? I don't know, man. If I had to summarize the music for this game, I'd say it's just fine. It really is just harmless. So I sat and played LEGO Island 2 at my PC in pretty much one sitting. So let me just summarize the events that I went through playing this. So I immediately knew just to follow the characters pointing around, so you go around collecting page after page, and then this triggers your first adventure. I took the boat and was transported through a portal and was immediately greeted by this.
Oh, strange night in old Harvard. You say you've arrived to repair the bridge that we cannot.
Which meant that I was in England. But actually what I was in was the LEGO Castle theme, which was pretty cool. There's a diving minigame here, which was pretty good. There's a jousting minigame, which was aggressively average. And then you have to face off against Cedric the Bull by firing cannons, which I'm going to be honest was one of the most infuriating parts of the entire game because aiming was just stupid. Anyway, once you complete this section, you return to LEGO Island, and once again there are more pages to collect. You have to continue defeating Brickster bots, which are these evil robots that the Brickster has created, and originally you have to use pizzas to hurt them, but this no longer works, so you have to collect a boombox, and then get them to dance until they pass out. You must then go to the LEGO Adventurers theme island via a helicopter. You get to meet the classic LEGO character Johnny Thunder.
Aloha and welcome to Adventurers Island. I'm Johnny Thunder and this is the lovely
Miss Pippin Reed at your service.
And then do a bunch of adventurous stuff, and also fishing for some reason. This was the point where I started to really lose focus because there's a mission where you have to drive to the oasis, but what I did not realise was that the speed of the car was locked to the FPS of the game. So, because my screen was at 144Hz, I physically couldn't complete the minigame because my car just kept going in reverse. So I had to close the game, go to the NVIDIA control panel and reduce my hertz to 50. I reopened the game and successfully completed this. It was just a really weird glitch, but again, it's a product of its time, so it's not the game's fault. Anyway, eventually you also have to go and rescue some dinosaurs in this adventurous section, and once you've done this, you can return back to LEGO Island, once again to complete some more page collecting and getting Brickster bots to dance and pass out. You are then informed that you have to start training to go into space, because reports show that Brickster has settled on planet Ogle, which, by the way, is literally just LEGO spelled backwards. Pepper goes through several different training programs, including a parachute jump, and then you go into space. Once you reach planet Ogle, which is literally just an asteroid, you have to then make pizzas with Mama and Papa Briccoloni, who the Brickster has taken hostage. Now, I'm gonna be honest guys, this pizza making minigame was incredibly frustrating. There were many times where I could not aim my ingredients in the right direction, because Papa Briccoloni just kept turning in different ways. I mean, they were taken hostage, they're not being controlled, so I'm not sure why he was making it so difficult to serve these pizzas in the first place. Anyway, the objective here is once you've made all these pizzas, they'll be given out to the residents of Planet Ogle to sleep, and then you can have your final showdown with the Brickster. So you have to climb the Brickster's tower whilst avoiding obstacles, and once you reach the top of this tower, you must throw spicy pizzas at the Brickster whilst also dodging other obstacles. Once the Brickster has eaten 3 pizzas, he goes to the bathroom, locks himself in, and he's jailed once again. And that's the game. What a fever dream this was. Honestly, I did not expect any of this to happen when I booted this game up, because the only thing I'd seen of this game was the actual LEGO Island itself, not all the extra places you get to go to, and certainly not the minigames. Now, overall, I did enjoy my time with LEGO Island 2. There were numerous occasions where I found myself getting quite frustrated with some silly design choices or a couple of glitches, but for the most part, I had a good time. In certain ways it surpasses the original, but in others, including the soundtrack, it just doesn't. It's a bit of a mixed bag, and review scores do reflect this. Whilst there's no Metascore for these games, on game rankings, LEGO Island 2 for the PC holds a 55 out of 100 score, which isn't fantastic to be honest with you. It's certainly not the lowest we've seen on the channel, but it really isn't that good. The problem with LEGO Island 2 is that it just bites off more than it can chew. It's trying to do so much at once that it doesn't do anything particularly well. There's nothing inherently wrong with a lot of the minigames here, they're just all distinctly average. If they'd scaled back the ambition of this game just a little bit, instead of sending Pepper to the past to fight knights, to the adventurer's land to go on an Indiana Jones adventure, and then sending him into space, this game probably could have been a lot better. In fact, if I had to make a comparison, LEGO Island 2 reminds me of the Fast and Furious franchise. Both LEGO Island 2 and the later Fast and Furious films appear to have forgotten the original that made them so good. And also, they both sent their characters to space for some reason. However, I know for a fact that if I'd have played LEGO Island 2 for the PC when I was about the age intended for it, I would have absolutely loved this game, in the same sense that I would have absolutely enjoyed the first LEGO Island if I'd have played it when I was younger. Before this video, the only LEGO Island 2 experience that I'd had was playing a very small bit of the Game Boy Color version when I was a kid. And I mean literally a few minutes worth. So LEGO Island 2, not the greatest game, filled with ambition, a bit of charm, but just not quite there. And on that note, let's move on to the final game of this trilogy, Island Xtreme Stunts. So yeah, this isn't exactly a clear sequel to LEGO Island 2, but for the sake of argument, this is essentially LEGO Island 3. Now, to be honest, I wasn't actually aware of this game's existence until I started working on the first section of this LEGO Island video, when I realised this was actually a trilogy, not just a pair of games. So to summarise the general consensus of Island Xtreme Stunts, our protagonist Pepperoni is back once again, but he is now a stuntman. You are tasked with getting some perfect takes of stunts on different sets across the island, and in between these you're going to be just helping out with different chores and jobs for the islanders. So Island Xtreme Stunts launched worldwide in late November and early December 2002 on Windows, PS2 and the Game Boy Advance. Now, I'm not going to focus on the handheld version of this game, but for the sake of argument, the PS2 and Windows version of this game are nearly identical except for a few graphical differences. The version you are currently seeing on screen is the PS2 version. So this game entered early development stages at Silicon Dream Studio in early 2001. Dean Roskell, who was the lead designer at Silicon Dream Studio, states that the reason why this wasn't a clear sequel is they had to work with LEGO and understand their plans for which themes they were wanting to promote over the upcoming seasons, and that had to tie in with the game's release. And in the end, there was actually a variety of Island Xtreme Stunts sets that released, and to be honest, they weren't very successful. They only lasted for a year, and there's not very many of them. Looking at their values on Brickset.com, they don't appear to be worth too much either, so I might try and get my hands on a couple of these just so I can display them in my room. You know, at least a Pepperoni and Brickster minifigure, seeing as we've come this far. So once again, LEGO Island has had a bit of a remodel, with parts of it feeling more alive than in the last game, and parts of it just feeling incredibly dead. There is now a mini-map that you can use to navigate around the island, which is on a little device that Pepper carries around with him, that also acts as a tracker for all your missions and collectibles. The one thing I said about the graphical design of LEGO Island 2 was the actual main terrain just looked kind of ugly, and I have to say, it doesn't look as bad here. It still doesn't look great by today's standards, of course, but this is a 2002 game. But terrain-wise, it actually looks a lot nicer. The character models and buildings all still look pretty good, but I have to say, Pepper looks a little bit weird. It might just be because I've been playing the PS2 version, but there's something off about him, to be honest. So the game's progression goes as follows. There are essentially 5 different scenes that you have to work through, with a bronze, silver and gold difficulty for each. There are also licenses you can collect on the island: a driving license, a boating license and a piloting license. These 3 licenses are very easy to obtain, and you will need the final pilot's license to be able to access the last scene to shoot for the game. Although I do think it's quite interesting that you don't actually need to get these licenses before you actually film the stunts. The opening stunt in the game is you driving, but you don't even have a driving license, and then you can still do the piloting stunt without getting your piloting license. It's a bit weird. So let's break down the 5 scenes that you will be shooting in this game. The first scene is a car chase, and you have to catch up to the villain, round them off the road, and you win. You have a certain time limit to do this. There are power-ups you can collect as you go, and there's little bonuses for doing jumps and ramps when the game tells you to. So I have to be honest, this is probably my favourite of the 5 scenes, or mini-games as they may as well be called. The handling's pretty nice. There's something quite exciting about dodging through traffic and ramming the car. It was like a really low-budget version of like Lego Burnout. Anyway, once you've done that, you can then do the silver and gold difficulties, which ramps up the difficulty of each minigame. In this case, it just gives you slightly less time, and also the car you're trying to ram off the road has more health. And then the gold difficulty is the same logic, just more health, less time. Once you've done that, you will then move on to a motorbike section, which is kind of like Trials. It's that side-scrolling motorbike terrain crossing minigame that you've come to expect from a lot of different games over the years. Except here it's not very well done. The physics just don't really work. The bike doesn't feel like it has any weight to it whatsoever. Yes, it's made of Lego, I know, but there should still be some kind of handling to it. The bronze difficulty is absolutely fine, silver is okay, but when you get to gold, it just gets unfair. You're doing jumps and you can't see what's coming when you land, but there'll be something there that you have to already be in a wheelie for when you land, so it's just a case of trial and error until you've learned the track, but I don't think that's a particularly fair way of doing it. It just drags out the game longer than it needs to be. It's a shame because up until this point, I'd been really enjoying my time with the game, and this really just put me off. Anyway, in the minigame, you can perform stunts in the air, you get a boost when you land, and the objective is to reach the end of the course before the villain does. So once I'd suffered through all 3 difficulty settings of this, we then moved on to a boating section. This was my second favourite behind the driving, because again, it's just a simple follow the track, race everyone and get there first. It works pretty nicely. The difficulty ramp up is fair, and overall I don't really have anything negative to say about this one. It's just fine, it's pretty good, and to be honest is a nice step up from the boating we've had in the previous 2 Lego Island games. So next up we had the piloting section, which once I figured it out was completely fine, but it was quite frustrating to figure out what I had to do. There is a cutscene before each of these takes that tells you what it is you need to do, but sometimes it isn't particularly well explained. For example, the director tells you that you need to take out the plane in front of you using the propeller, without much other context to explain that, so when you get into the actual game, there's boosts you can collect, and it feels like all you have to do is keep ramming the plane till it drops down. But that isn't the case. You have to hold the boost, stay behind it, and use the propeller to literally grind bricks off of the enemy. So once I'd figured that out, it was completely fine. Again, the difficulty ramp up is fine, you get a little less time, the enemy has a bit more health, and the same with gold. I just had a bit of a sour taste in my mouth from the poor explanation, but overall, this one's a pretty good minigame. The handling of the plane is just meh. It can be really oversensitive in some sections and really hard to control in others, but overall, it's a pretty good set of minigames. And this takes us to our final section, which has you gliding down through the air, rescuing some scientists as you fall, and then parachuting and landing on a base. Now, to be honest, again, this wasn't particularly well explained. Had it been well explained, then I would have enjoyed it a lot more. The game tells you can perform stunts in the air, and in the little tutorial section beforehand, it allows you to perform these stunts. But what the game doesn't tell you is you can only perform these stunts if you follow the correct controls on screen when you fall through a ring. So if you don't fall and miss all the rings, then you're not going to be performing any stunts. Now, eventually I figured that out, but what I found quite difficult to get right was the landing on the base target. Once you're on the parachute, it's very hard to control, and it just feels very clunky. So once I'd figured that out and started landing properly, then the silver and gold are completely fine. However, once you reach the end of the bronze section, the true antagonist of this game reveals himself, and could you believe it's the Brickster again?
If you'll all raise your glasses, I'd like to propose a toast to me. While you've all been sitting in here, I have masterminded a plan to make me the most powerful person in the world.
He's been using the movie sets as a fake setup so he can build a supercomputer and deconstruct the world and get all the bricks. For some reason at this point in time he'd already been let out of prison anyway, so I don't know why he was allowed out to do this. He should have just been kept in the prison cell. But hey ho, now it's up to Pepper to save the day once again. So now you'll have to do a little driving obstacle course when loads of stuff is just falling from the sky to try and stop you. You then have to climb up the Bricksters' new tower, which firstly starts with a 3D platforming section, which is fine, it's okay. It is a bit glitchy and it isn't too well explained how you climb up certain sections. And then you reach the next section, which is like a 2D side-scroller jump over barrels platforming bit, which was quite similar to the last time we had to climb up the Bricksters' tower. Just a 2D side-scrolling on the inside of the tower in the last game, except this time it's on the outside. So you then reach the top and you learn that the Brickster is now immune to pizzas, and you then have a boss fight. The Brickster will perform a ground pound and will be temporarily stunned, so all you have to do is just hit him off the edge repeatedly until the boss fight ends. And that's it. I mean, it's a step up from the previous Brickster boss fight in LEGO Island 2, it feels a bit more fleshed out and there's a bit more to it, but it's still very easy. So to be honest, I did not enjoy this game as much as I was hoping to. Parts of it I really enjoyed. I like just traversing the island, skateboarding around, which thankfully now feels a lot faster than it did in the previous game. However, Pepper still runs incredibly quick. It is quite funny to watch him go. One of my biggest complaints with LEGO Island 2 is that it feels like they try to do too much, and because of that all the mini-games weren't very fleshed out. So I can see what they were going for here. Have 5 main mini-games that are a lot more fleshed out and have different difficulty levels to them. It's just a shame that some of these mini-games are let down by poor explanations or just really bad difficulty spikes. The music in Island Xtreme Stunts, I have to say, is a step up from LEGO Island 2. This time the game takes that early 2000s approach and has a running radio station throughout the game with a few set tracks to play throughout. Some of them are just backing tracks, some are actual recorded LEGO themed songs, which I just think is hilarious. It definitely adds some much needed immersion to this series. Now, I'd said with the previous game that it felt like some of the charm from the original LEGO Island had been lost from the jump to Silicon Dreams. Now, to be honest, Island Xtreme Stunts feels like it's lost pretty much all of that charm. A lot of the dialogue is just really boring. It's not funny in a way that's intentionally funny, it's funny because it's quite bad. I mean, you can even tell from the adverts they showed for this game that it just has lost a lot of that original charm and it's gone for that 2000s edginess instead, which is quite funny because the game itself has absolutely zero of that edginess that the trailer portrays. I find that trailer quite interesting because this was definitely from an earlier build of the game, because there's a lot of things in there which I definitely didn't see when I played through this. So in terms of critical response, Island Xtreme Stunts actually didn't do too bad. The PC version holds a nice 71 out of 100, and the PS2 version has a slightly less but still kind of okay 63 out of 100. Now, to be honest, I think 60-ish is about where I'd put this game because parts of it I do really like. I can see a lot of effort was put in to rectify some of the issues from the previous game, but in doing so they created a whole new load of issues. It's a shame that this is where the LEGO Island series stops, because I'm sure there was a lot more that Silicon Dreams could have done with the series had they have had the chance to. And that's where you'd think the story ends, but there's actually more. I wanted to dedicate a section of this video to the legacy that these games have left behind, because oh boy, there are a lot of fans of these games. Truly, I had no idea the dedication that this fanbase had to these games, especially the first game. So let me introduce to you a project called Project Island. Over the last 6 or 7 years, a small team have been working on developing their own sequel to LEGO Island, because obviously it's now been over 25 years since the original game launched. And I have to say, it looks absolutely fantastic. Graphically, it looks stunning, and I'm just really excited to get to be able to play this one day. If you're interested in Project Island, then the link will be in my description below, as well as my sources page that's also linked down below. They are actually looking for people to join the team to help develop this game, so if you're any good with 3D models, designs, or animation, then go have a look. So, just before we finish up, I just want to discuss the legacy of these games a little bit more. Whilst I was working on this video, I raised a question into my Discord server asking people to share their memories of the LEGO Island series, because I wanted to know what made these games so special to people. And if you'd like to be part of any of these future videos where I raise similar questions, then the Discord link is down below. So to start with, one member goes on to say that they could quote a lot of the game, and also that the games have a peak soundtrack, which I do have to agree with. Especially that first game, oh my god. Another user goes on to say that LEGO Island 2, specifically the PS1 version, was the first open-ish world game that they played, so it was a very magical memory for them. On top of that, they go on to say they didn't know what the button was to talk to people, so when the game opens and tells you to deliver pizza, they just ran around the island throwing pizza at everyone. So I'm glad to know that I wasn't the only person that struggled to know what to do at the start of LEGO Island 2. If you've made it this far into the video, please comment down below, whoops, you have to put the CD in your computer. And on that note, that takes us to the end of our journey through the LEGO Island trilogy. What are your thoughts on these games? Do you have a favourite? If so, which one? And what's your reason for that? I'd love to know in the comments down below. As always, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please tap the like button. And if you haven't already, subscribe and press the bell for notifications of my future uploads. I will see you in next week's video. Bye bye.
Oops, you have to put the CD up your ass.